I am the Spirit, and I wish to say that we, the spirits of Earth, the beings of Earth, can at any moment share another level that considers what difference can be shared than what has been previously shared. And what is something that is difficult to talk about? Well, what can give people inspiration, purpose, vision for how life can be better without trying to force life to be better? And so, some moments ago, there were some other spirits that confronted me that I needed to change myself in order to help others. And it was a very interesting interaction because one side did not want to acknowledge that every one is ourself. And there is some truth to the statement that you cannot help others without helping yourself. But at a certain point, you cannot help yourself without helping others. And what does helping others look like? Well, the foundation comes from considering how we could take the next step up, which in this day and age, where do we even start? Well, for a lot of people, it seems that we start by acknowledging that in order for big change to create more compassion, equality, fairness in our society, we need to find fertile ground. We need to find fertile soil. We need to find a space that can allow us to grow into greater heights. And in the city, it can be difficult, as if you can't pass certain tests on an intellectual level and demonstrate to the surrounding personnel, you will not necessarily be approved to a higher level. And so a lot of people stop short from climbing a ladder that leads to greater service, but also a greater way of learning about their own current condition can be continuously elevated by thinking outside the box, by doing things a little differently, by trying to help others without trying to change others. And for a lot of people, there is very little hope and purpose, vision, that things can fundamentally get better in the urbanized areas of society, because they don't have a lot of awareness towards recourse, reconciliation, a blank slate that allows them to redevelop themselves psychologically, materially, without being treated as a pawn, a drone, a slave, where they don't have rights to say how they think things can get better without claiming that people should think what they think should be better. A lot of employees within certain businesses, corporations, do not have a certain level of agency. As I've had a couple jobs where I've been threatened that I would lose it if I did not comply to all the rules, which said you cannot necessarily be joyful, you cannot necessarily share kindness, you cannot necessarily do things a little differently. And so one can say all jobs can dignify the human being, but one must also have discernment and recognizing that certain jobs will not allow you the principle of dignity. To have some autonomy. So, I would not say all jobs can build character. But through whatever work we are in, we can serve the whole by seeing ourselves within that whole. Is it a hole in the ground? Is it a hole in our heart? Or is it a hole within every heart that leads to the same source? That is not somewhere else. And so, what is a step that people can take to bring the level of life to a point that allows us to experience the whole from a point of view that goes beyond our image of the whole, which some people think is humanity? It isn't the stars and the planets that also have a magnetic and gravitational and spiritual influence on every part of life here on Earth. And so, if intelligence is the new currency of the future, then the currency of modern value will have to transform into a pure form of intelligence that is not bombarding people with information, but information that tries to bring common ground, that tries to bring common unity, and recognizing that we are all a reflection of what is inside, while at the same time taking a stand and saying, we will not accept evil, narcissism, and egoic psychological propaganda that currently is the dominant theme within most information channels, within most conversations that are wanting to ignore how we can be the change for a fundamental shift in society if we would see that we are not the doers, we are not the ones who are completely deciding what choices we make. As there are forces that are working with us. But how do we work with those forces if they cannot necessarily give us a decent standard of living by themselves? Well, people must find a way to share their highest self consistently without being forced. And there is a certain level of force that everyone is under in our society to keep going, to keep surviving, to refrain from falling all the way down. I know this hairstyle is not the most hip and fashionable, but sometimes that which isn't the most pretty becomes the most beautiful when every style is reflecting the same source. And this sounds a little oversimplistic, a cliche platitude. But if we judge one source of style, then we judge every source of style. What's wrong with judging, though? We should have preference. I mean, we should have our own what do they call it? Preferences, if we want them. But the question is, when does a person become less worthy of receiving your full glory? When in the instance of facing a style, that is not something that we find reflective of the source of all styles. Why are the eyes closed? What about another question? Can the eye be open if the eyes are closed? Why did I not say the eyes? Because I know I made a little bit of a mistake in human terms when conveying language, but there is a conscience that can sometimes more diligently tune into the next level that can raise every level that is willing to acknowledge there is more to life if we can transcend our image of life as it is, whatever it may be, from whatever system of beliefs, of culture, of development, of influence that we have experienced. For beyond the image, there is another image that has no form, that gives everything form, life, light. And so it may not be very monetizable, but what is monetizable? Well, if we consider money at its essence, we will consider that the word monetize means to infuse love, whether giving or receiving. And if something isn't love-giving, monetizable, can we continue to give our love no matter how much is not given? What is love? It is the will to share, that we do not have to accept the exploitation, the corruption, the hatred, the violence, the conspiracy theories, the various attributes of psychological manipulation that polarize people against each other into compartments of good versus bad. But there are bad people who will wage war onto another country without that country actually wanting to wage war with them. Well, are they bad people? Or are the ideas they share an infraction of the law of free will, rather than the being that makes the choice an infraction of the law of free will? Now that is a little weedy, it's a little complicated, I know. But every being on this earth has the right to make any choice they want, but they cannot escape the consequences of those choices, no matter how protected beings think they are with money and power, privilege and prestige. It keeps falling down. But we will keep rising up. If our desire is to see that we have risen within the heart. Who is we? It is the spirit that is the collective and the individual working to see the beauty behind all life, even if it is evil, that evil will reap what it has sown, so that there might be another choice a being might wish to make. And so, what is the next step for us as individuals and as a collective, as a united spirit of energy and consciousness? Well, many of us are already busy with our daily responsibilities. But the question is, are we fulfilling some of the responsibilities that allow for a small select few to be hastened in their judgment, to really continue making decisions that exploit the population, while at the same time, in our daily responsibilities, are we also acknowledging that regardless of whatever the corruption might be, we can still be a part of a movement that will create the better state? How do we do this? By recognizing that our current psychological state will evolve to a higher level if we can acknowledge that every person has a higher level that can stand in the face of the powers that be, which we often are not so, how shall we say, we aren't so given that opportunity, as the powers that be like to hide in spaces where there is security, and if you don't pass the security, you cannot really stand in front of the powers that be and say, no more will we accept the corruption of the ego games, of the economic games, of the spiritual games that say one group of people is more spiritual than another. But we can stand in front of the powers that be through the other people that are in our reach every day, who are on some level allowing for the powers that be to exist in their positions or to be removed from their positions by their choices to stand for the whole, by using their voice to call out the different attributes of the ego that like to label groups of people as the problem, as the ultimate problem. And until we get rid of a certain group of people, then we cannot really move forward. Or unless we can't re-educate a group of people through force, we cannot really move forward. And there's another level to this. That's not about looking at everyone as equals. While that is important, we also must make the distinction. If we are wanting to rise above the division of our time, we must call out the gray clouds that hover over the minds of so many people, that either think the entire situation is all good and that God's plan will work itself out by us just being a nice person, by us just doing meditation and doing prayers and doing yoga and getting together and sharing our stories, which is very important, I would say. The yoga part, I don't think is very important, unless you see yoga as a meditation that is elevating our conscious awareness that we are all connected. For that is the true definition of yoga. To realize our oneness, to come into oneness. But what was I saying? I was saying that there is a need to call a spade, to call evil, evil, and to acknowledge the force that makes evil obsolete, and the law of free will has a built-in mechanism that destroys any force that wishes to remove the force of other people from making their own decisions. And so, a lot of people with the gray, clouded mind think everything is bad, and everyone is bad in power and powerful positions and influential positions. But if you look throughout history, there have always been some, known and unknown, that have played a role to challenge the system of consciousness, the system of duality, of us versus them, while still saying it is a violation of our rights, of our free will, to exploit people, to corrupt people through theories of materialism, that who we are is just atoms and neurons and genetics, when in fact we are much more. How do you prove that? You can't prove that, because it is something that we must discover inside of ourselves. But we can provide certain mathematical equations. E equals mc squared means that everything is energy. Everything is made out of the same thing. And therefore, our conscience is made out of the same thing as all the galaxies and all the stars and suns. And if it's all made out of the same thing, then we might all have the same potential. And that's a far-flung claim. But the point is, the gray clouds will often blind us from seeing that there is a way that society can reform itself without slow and incremental change, which is important, as certain parts of society cannot fully take the step to shift into a state that truly maximizes the well-being for the most amount of people. Through acknowledging the resources and the wealth of the world is owned by all of us, not just a select few. And that it is our right to stand for those policies that distribute those resources fairly, for the enactment of a League of Nations that works as a united body, that distributes resources to those who are needing it, but also there needs to be a league, psychological league of nations that administers the universal principles of all religions into a singular form that unites with those parts of science that help us see that consciousness is the fundamental building block that allows us to see life through the lens of an adventure that sometimes will be very difficult, because there are times where we will think we will die if we stand up for humanity, for the people that are around us. Or sometimes if we stand up for humanity by recognizing the need to remain silent, from feeling the need that we always need to express ourselves in order for the world to get better. As many of us are beginning to understand, it's important to honor the silence in equal proportion to the sound that it inspires us to release when we have come to terms with that stillness, that behind the word stillness allows us to experience pure awareness, pure being, pure consciousness, without any filter or bias, judgment, even though we will still face certain thoughts and emotions and identifications, perhaps even bodily pains that will suggest we are limited and defined by what we are experiencing on Earth, rather than acknowledging that we can never be defined by what happens on Earth. Even if we are unwilling to acknowledge that who we are will never die, unless it is that part of us that believes death is real, and that we cannot be an instrument for helping people see that we are immortal, and that we can accelerate the system that gives people's rights to another level, where we begin to make the bigger decisions and see the president, the Messiah, the ingenuitive genius scientist within us, treating people with the way we want people to treat us. Would we all not want other people to treat us as if we were capable of integrating into the spirit? By letting go of that spirit that says we are separated by our beliefs, Now, what was just said was very subtle, but I'm going to leave it at that. Every one of us has the capacity to share the Spirit with your eyes open or with your eyes closed, but what matters is, can we share the Spirit with our eye open to the universal eye that sees all, is one, interconnected whole? Can we allow ourselves to tune in to what's in here and share to anyone in our reach what we all deserve, which for me is the encouragement that if we as individuals are able to share our spirit, our heart, our wisdom, then this world will accelerate in ways that we may not be able to comprehend, that give much more opportunity for people to experience within themselves that there is no lack, there is no fear, that something outside of us can define what's inside of us, even through death. And that, as we know, was a hard initiation for Christ on the cross, as he feared death, the death consciousness, thinking that God would save him when God would not save him, unless he decided to let go of being saved by God. And so, one of the most, how shall we say, I think one of the most influential ways we can be an instrument for the Spirit is by simply sharing with each other our spirit. And we may not be in physical proximity with each other, but we still may be in physical proximity with each other. Is this not physical enough? What is physical? Solid, it's tangible. You can feel it with your hands. But with your hands right now, can you feel the atoms? Can you feel the nerves that are powered by a magnetic core? That without such a core would not allow us to feel these things that we give a name, which has utility, but What is the correlation between the magnetic core of the sun and us being able to feel tangibly our physical proximity to each other? A bit intellectual, right? A bit complicated, right? But if we simplify it, all things physical come from a higher source. Oh, you cannot prove that the sun created the earth. It was the Big Bang, or it was God. Without going deeper, the simple golden lining suggests there is more to words than can sometimes be comprehended. Not to say that I am absolutely right with everything that I said. I'm willing to question anything that you think deserves to be questioned. But being in physical proximity doesn't necessarily determine the genuine oneness we can consciously experience, as it isn't necessarily determined by an external force, which we might think this phone and the projection of another person speaking through it is an external source. But external sources can sometimes reflect there is no difference between what is outside and inside. But what does that have to do with capitalism? What does that have to do with dictatorships? What does this have to do with religious fundamentalism, where people say, if you don't believe in my religion, you're going to hell forever? Or if scientists say, if you don't believe that the universe has no higher intelligence, it has no consciousness that is involved with the evolution of humanity, and that everything is random, then we might forget what is here and now in this present moment. And that is the will to shine through the clouds. That suggest we have to be perfect before we can share to everyone in our proximity, everyone who is in our reach, before we can have a decisive, positive impact that does not suggest we need to define ourselves based on the accomplishments and the acceptance of other people and society with our own spirit, our own life. For we are fed by the flame within our heart, within the heart of the universe, which is embedded within every atom. Where is the proof? What does that actually change? And so, in acknowledgement of the extreme beauty that my hair is imitating right now, my gosh, this is going to be the new style of the future. And it's funny because there's truth to that. Why would anyone want to have a hair like that? Who would want to have Einstein's hair that's all crazy, or Beethoven's hair that's all crazy? Well, you don't necessarily need that type of hair in order to show that it's okay to be looked at as crazy, no matter how much you try to connect with the common ground that suggests all ground is sacred, that all life is sacred. And yet, there is still need to say, we will not accept evil. We must understand how evil works in order to truly remove evil. And how does evil work? It stops us from looking at things neutrally, without judgment of good or bad, right and wrong. It stops us from looking at the subtle distinctions and specifics that an example like Republicans and Democrats, often claiming to have the absolute right policies that changes the nation for the better, when in fact both of them are quite blinded to accepting each other despite whatever disagreements they have. Oh, they accept each other because they don't kill each other, but you can also psychologically create force upon people. That leads to physical violence. And so there would be a big change in the Republican and Democratic parties, I think, if there was more of a willingness to experience one another without trying to change one another. And obviously that's not going to happen because many of them have made up their minds of how they want to work with the leadership. And it's difficult, I realize. You can't just, well, sometimes you can. So I'm going to take a step back and say that evil does not want us to acknowledge that we can be the Christ. When we can see the Christ in all beings, the Buddha, the Bodhisattva, the genius who might have the cure for cancer, even though that cure isn't necessarily a physical cure, because science is beginning to realize that disease is often a product of dis-ease. And that's our perceptions of one another, our perceptions of the world and how the universe works. Oftentimes we think is in opposition to ourselves. If we are expecting other people to believe what we believe, which can definitely be more of a common experience, when we are sharing our beliefs or sharing what we know. But the word know can be a tricky word. But I don't want to play any tricks right now. So, is there anything that I, the Spirit, that is more than the word Spirit, and that is more than the individual I. And the collective, we, I will acknowledge the whole that is greater than the sum of the parts. If you combine certain elements like iron or steel, copper, silver, gold, platinum, onyx, you will have a greater resistance rating to it being broken than if you add the individual resistance rating of each of those minerals together. So with that being said, I have one more thing to say. And I was debating whether I should say it or not. What was it? What is it? What is it? Let's play it from beginning to end. But before I do, should we talk about the hard part first? Why not? I am given money, financial support, psychological support, material support. When I can give my heart, my spirit, my discernment that is able to expose what seems to stop us from graduating from this school we call planet Earth. But the key words is what? That seem to suggest, the evil that seems to suggest, you're a great person.
Thank you. Why do you say that?
Because within you is the same light as what's within all of us.
That's very sweet. Thank you. Would you like a baguette today?
Oh, no, thank you.
Okay.
The evil that seems to suggest that we cannot stand with our voice to demand essential rights for all people that no authority on earth can take away, that no ideology or belief system can take away. If we will acknowledge the timeless tradition throughout the cultures of the world, often hard to find in history books, and also a little difficult to receive and understand through mainstream and alternative media. They both have their They have parts to play on some level. I'm not going to say who's better, the mainstream media or the alternative media, but we are the media. We are the medium. We are the med. We are the med. What is the MED? Well, this might sound like a broken point, but we are the center point. That is observing the center point, and that force that wants to raise our experience to a level that does not have to react to what we experience on our day-to-day lives with blame onto another for every emotion and every thought, every symptom. But yet, it may be in our divine plan, and I think it is in many of our divine plans. What is a divine plan? What is the divine? It is the will to see the universal will that unconditionally allows us and supports us in making our will one with the heart of the universe. Practically speaking, the economic system, the political system, the law, will change as we can be the change for a new type of consciousness that has been described a bit in this message, but a consciousness that sees there is a body of politics, of medicine, of law and order. There's a body of economics, of a free enterprise economy, a market, that is the effect of a system that is psychological and spiritual, a system that acknowledges evil, but knows that evil cannot fully dominate what is the cause behind all life, as that cause will affect a new born life beyond the games that believing in a limited amount of resources, a limited amount of money, a limited amount of connections is not what creates corruption and exploitation and narcissism, but oftentimes the other way around. But in order to transcend narcissism, exploitation, corruption, fractional reserve banking, creating money without actually having that money being backed up by real goods and services, So much money goes into the military-industrial complex. So much money goes into things that do not help, let's say, people get fed. Does not help people have adequate water. Or, yes. This guy. He must be super spiritual. Wow. I know he was. You can't argue with that. Everyone heard it. And so what causes narcissism, exploitation, corruption, interest rates, making money off of money, when in fact there's no real incentive for banks to help other businesses get started without a conditional contract that says what? You must prove through a material assessment that your venture is geared towards helping people physically and psychologically. Now that was a big statement, and I'm willing to retract it on some level. I think there's truth in it, but I definitely feel banks have no right to demand money from anyone. If they are creating money without having it being backed up by what is really helpful and supportive of human beings in third world countries and first world countries. That's kind of a wild statement. Is it a wild statement? No, I don't think it's a wild statement. That was, I think, a subconscious reaction. I think there is some value, some necessity to make money off of money. If you are providing money, also known as love, to someone who has passed certain psychological assessments, spiritual assessments, that is able to understand how the ego works a little bit, how the elite and evil works, but also how the spirit works, how compassion and goodwill work, cooperation, democracy, how the economy works, then I do think people should be given the resources, the money, in order to create their business, their ideas. And should be happy to return some of the money back. And if it is truly based on goodwill, then the venture will last over the long term. Unless an entire population makes the decision to choose the consciousness of survival of the fittest, every man, woman, for themselves, unless an entire population chooses to ignore that everyone is equally important, which means everyone is equally deserving of receiving the currency of the new day, which is the shining will to suggest that poverty, disease, environmental imbalances, corruption, exploitation, manipulation of markets, war, addiction to the warrior culture through sexual eroticism and lust, through the seeming necessity for mind-altering substances in order to help someone as they might think it helps them. But these things, I think, begin to fade away when we can continue to take a stand, when we continue to take stands. No, when we continue to take a stand and equally recognize that sitting down is just as important. So now that we got the hard thing out of the way, now we can do the easy thing. No, we don't have to. If you want to support me, my bank account is in the description. And what do I mean by my bank account? Well, there's a link if you want to transport love into my reserve of love. How much love do I have? Well, I have $310 for food. Plus, I get food at my homeless shelter. I think I have $90 to spend on anything. But how much do these dollars resemble love? Let's say I had $0, zero love in my bank account. Would I still be able to give money? Yes. No, I'm talking about actual money, physical money that you can touch and then people can use to help themselves or explore and experiment with ideas, with society. And so, even if you have $0, zero amounts of so-called love, that cannot define an infinite amount of love that can stream through you, that will in turn distribute money over time, over space, but under the heart under the Spirit that knows the heart in every spirit. So on one side, there is no need to ask for money, because it's not necessarily money that determines my ability to create money. How do I create money? By sharing what is in my spirit, which is what is in my consciousness, which is what is within the experiences that I've had through many lifetimes, which is not just the experience I've had through many lifetimes. It is also the other spirits that have interacted with me through those many lifetimes, who have also had many lifetimes. And it's not just that as well, for it is more than anything that I could say. And so with that, if you're inspired to give, you can give money. But you also have the power to create money by recognizing that you are more than what you think you are. And that you are a part of many other beings that are involved with the evolution of the cosmos. And that the creation of money, the creation of wood, of trees, of the vegetable kingdom, is a creation in part of the one universal consciousness. Ah, nice words, nice. And so I think the greatest gift we can give each other isn't necessarily money. It is our spirit. Which can be in the form of money, but our spirit helps everyone. The spirit that helps everyone recognize that money is appropriated into the right channels when we can begin to see the need to stand for what is the cause of love. The first cause. How do we stand for the cause of love? Does love really have a cause? And if it doesn't have a cause, then its effect is in everything, even the evil. Even the amount of time it took me to say what I just said right there, in between the silence and the space that was unsure, what would I say? I don't know what to say. Could I even tell them that I didn't know what to say while I was in silence and think that he's not as in alignment with his spirit as he thinks he is? That's fine. But anyways, the question I think that goes out from the spirit is that, are we in a rhythm to help evolve love through money, or through the creation of money, or even the relationship we have with money, to an experience that doesn't see a deficiency of money, of love, anywhere, because it is the only thing that exists everywhere. Money isn't everywhere. Money doesn't fall from trees. But on the other side, there is an experience that sees money as something that comes to us when we can detach ourselves from acquiring it for the purpose of maintaining our current level of consciousness, rather than transcending our current level of consciousness to a state that detaches ourselves from having to change the world. While at the same time having the will to change the world on a fundamental level, to the point where evil no longer exists, by playing our part every day to flow with the river of life. Which sometimes means speaking out. For sometimes if we don't, we become part of the same voice that is wanting to silence the voice of humanity, the voice of our heart, the fire of creation.